Welcome to Restoring Memory, a COVID Calls exploration of the first two COVID years. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters. And since March 16th, 2020, I've been the host of COVID Calls, a daily discussion of the pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. This is episode number 498. This is a Taiko performance by Marco Lienhard. And here he is. And let me introduce my guest to you, who was first on COVID Calls back in the summer of 2020, which is a long time ago in COVID time. Marco Lienhard studied the Shakuhachi under Master Katsuya Yokoyama, quickly mastering the instrument and becoming a virtuoso solo artist. He mastered taiko drumming as a member of Onde Koza for 18 years. While touring as a professional taiko player in Japan, Lienhard also studied the No theater flute with Yukimasa Iso. In 1995, he founded Taikoza in New York, where he now makes his home. With Taikoza, he has toured the United States, Japan, Mexico, and Europe, and he's performed more than 3,000 concerts in Europe, Oceania, Asia, and North and South America, with appearances at with many appearances around the world. He toured Japan with the Carnegie Kids program. He regularly teaches and performs in Japan, South America, the United States, and Russia. His best-selling albums include award-nominated Taikoza CD, best-selling music of Hayao Miyazaki 1 and 2 CD. He recently recorded 2 albums for piano and shakuhachi, the critically acclaimed Traveler's Song, as well as the classical music collection Reverie. He recorded music for a Nintendo Wii game called Red Steel 2. In 2015, he released 2 CDs of his music composed and arranged for Taikoza, Voice of the Earth, and Tree Spirit. And I have to say, he's a brilliant educator. And I want to start, actually, Marco, just by thanking you for being a really patient and wonderful educator and influence on my kids.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So it's good to see you again, Marco. How have you been since the last time we visited back in the summer of 2020?
Well, I think it's going a little better. I mean, a few things are happening live compared to just everything on Zoom. So in the US, it's sort of moved a little bit, sort of opening, and I think it's going to be really hard to shut it down again because nobody's going to take it no matter what happens. But so we'll see what happens.
When we talked last time, you gave us some really interesting background about your own life as a performer and your training and the sort of deeper history of taiko in Japan. And I kind of wanted to return to that, and maybe you could say a little bit more about how the music that you're interested in and that you play emerges from hard times, from difficulties, from disasters.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it really comes out of disasters, but I mean, some of the pieces sort of survived the different natural disasters in Japan and sort of were passed on through the generation, as in Japan compared to maybe Europe, where things were made out of stones. I mean, in Japan, everything's wood and it just gets blown away really quickly. And so we learned a piece from one festival close to Nagoya that was actually in the 50s. I think there was a big typhoon and it just wiped out the whole area. And one teacher sort of kept it up and he wanted to revive it. And so he started teaching to the children whatever he had remembered as he played it, and sort of reconstructed the whole festival and all the songs. So there were about 10 songs that he started teaching. I mean, he passed away about 15 years ago, but he taught us as well. He was open to having non-villagers participate too and sharing. So in that sense, it's been passed on thanks to a few people who were surviving and willing to sort of revive the traditions.
You also shared last time the experience of what it was like to master the instruments that you have and the very specialized and long training that it takes. And that's been on my mind a lot, actually, when we think about what the pandemic has forced people to do to try to cope? I mean, do you stay in? I mean, first, is Taiko still trained that way, and have people been able to train in this time? Because the way you described it, it was very communal, it was exercise oriented. There's a lot of sharing of space. Have people been able to do that?
Well, in Japan, I think yes. I mean, I look at on Facebook and what's happening, and I know there's one group from. Well, I was with this group Ondekoza that split in two, and recently in Europe, the other group was performing, going on tour in England, and I think it was going to Paris. So I don't know what's happening now because it's slowly shutting down again. But in Japan, I think because there's this tradition of wearing a mask when you have in flu season, so it's sort of the spread wasn't as bad, but it is now. But they were doing still some performances, so I think they were able to perform. And then the group, for example, I was with was a commune, so we lived all together, so we were already there, so we didn't have to commute. And so, as part of the training, running was part of the conditioning. So obviously that you can always do on your own, just training, sort of staying fit for the Taiko, playing together. Of course, it's a limited number of people that play together, but I think a little bit, for maybe 1 year, it was sort of everybody was kind of on a screeching halt, but little by little people were able to play again. And in the middle of the pandemic in August of 2020, actually, I went to Italy to do some touring, and it was sort of right before the second or third wave, and I was able to do some concerts in Torino outside and also in Parma. And there was a Taiko group there with the Buddhist temples and Buddhist, and they were practicing. They kept on practicing, and they were a little away from the city, and we performed outside on a square. So that was actually happening. So it was actually easier, I would say, in 2020 than in 21.
That's really impressive that you got to go to Italy, and particularly at places that were so devastated.
But what was interesting is I got another view from the Italian. I mean, we got from the government, we heard the stories, but when I went in the core of where it happened first, where everything was shut down, the story was a little different. I mean, it was a little, I wonder if eventually in the history things will come out, what actually happened in those hospitals, and how elderly was sort of forced to be in hospitals and almost left in a corner, knowing, there were other people trying to save. And so that's the stories I was hearing when I went in that region that was the hardest hit.
Those are hard stories to tell and hard stories to hear. I mean, it's going to take a lot of time for people to get, I don't know how people recover from things like that. Music helps. I mean, did you feel that you were providing almost a kind of to me, being in a square and hearing you play outdoors in the middle of all that would have been absolute therapy?
Yes, I mean, that was one reason to have it outside, also for the people to be able to experience it, but also especially Taiko has sort of that energy, just sort of infuse energy into people just listening to it. So I think in general also music helps people, and that's one of the first thing people go in time of hardship. They go to the arts and to being entertained, try to escape in a way, go in another world. And again, I feel it's always the last, the art is always the last one to be helped, or to be grants, or the arts grants are always the last ones to come. First it's the bankers, the lawyers, and all these people, and then eventually we get trickled down. But it's the first thing that people really need in case of hardship.
When we talked last time, in fact, you had just finished a period of time at which you were performing on your rooftop every night.
Yeah, so I mean, there was that tradition that started, I guess, in Italy, where people sort of were singing, banging pots, and And so we have a roof on our apartment building, so I started playing from 9 to 9:20 every day, and then people were sort of joining in, so I bought different drums so they could just join in. Some people played pots, but yes, I did that for, I think, from March till September every day
Yeah.
in 2020.
I mean, I think it just underscores your point of, the things that people turn to first for some solace were
Yeah.
narratives, stories, like things from other periods of times, either real or fictional. I can't tell you how many, interviews I've fielded where people wanted to know. I mean, they were asking about previous disasters, but what they really wanted to know is that we got through it, right? And I think,
Yeah.
so they rely on sort of narrative, story, and art and we do, to make sense of things that are complicated and scary.
Right. I mean, poetry, or I mean, painting, all these things are very sort of key to sort of for people to cope with hardship, I think.
One other question I wanted to get to, we're going to have, you're been kind enough to perform, and I see
So it's not going to
this
be
is,
Taiko, but because I'm
no,
obviously it's not.
that's
It's
fine.
going to be, yeah.
No, and you can tell us about the instrument and the style maybe before you play. But this is the 2-year anniversary of doing these COVID calls, and it's just, I've had in the last 2 days several artists. I just had David Brick, a choreographer and dancer, perform on screen, and yesterday I had singer-songwriter John Gorka perform. So it's really important to me to signal to people how I see art also as part of this broader conversation. I mean, I've talked to epidemiologists and I've talked to senators and representatives and scientists and social scientists, but I think in disasters we have to consult with artists too. I don't think we can understand what we're going through unless we talk with you, Marco, and others who have special, I think, talents of translating concern and giving it back to us in ways that we can use.
Yes, I do believe so. I mean, it should be sort of a what the society is made out of should be, every element should be included in those times of needs. I mean, just not scientists not always have the responses. They don't have the answers, obviously, even during the pandemic, though they are the specialists about viruses. But obviously, every day it seemed to be changing. So it seems everybody was kind of a scientist. I mean, looking at the ex-president, who thought he was.
So can you tell us what we're going to hear?
So this is a song. I mean, at first I started calling it pandemic blues, but it's not really a blues, but it was just kind of a general theme that I thought I give it, and then I just sort of wrote the piece. So I'm never very good at naming songs, coming up with titles. So this will be performed on Shakuhachi. So that's a bamboo flute. And so it has 5 holes, 4 in the front, 1 in the back. It's an end blown flute. So you play it as if you're trying to get a sound out of a bottle, just blow to get the sound. So this instrument also was used in Japan for meditation. Some monks play this instrument. And in a way, there was a disaster too. But in Japan, there was during the shogunate, all the samurai sort of became ronin. They lost their masters and they didn't know what to do. And a lot of them picked up the shakuhachi and became monks, and then became komuso, so traveling mendicants or monks, and they would play some tune on the flute. Theoretically, it was to meditate, to create a sound, to meditate through breathing. And so it started a whole sort of tradition of the Zen Fuke sect called Komuso. So, and then it sort of, after the Meiji era, it just changed a little bit and became more a general instrument that was used for Western music as well, of folk songs and more new Japanese music as well. So let me put some glasses here. So this is again as a sort of title, pandemic blues. Thank you.
So that's Pandemic Blues by Marco Lienhard, performed on, yeah.
So I wanted, it started kind of a little sad, but then I wanted to bring a little hope at the end, sort of an upbeat rhythm and melodies at the end. So
Yeah, the time signature changes there.
yeah.
And it is upbeat. I mean, I found myself even kind of want to get out of the chair here a little bit. Would you ordinarily accompany that with some movement?
Well, actually, it was with Taiko, but I can play the two things at a time. Plus, I couldn't play the Taiko in the hotel room. But
you might get a call from the front desk if you broke out the big drum.
So actually, I have like two. I have the main melody that you heard, then I have the second voice, and then there's a drum in the back. So before going into that fast part, first is a drum sort of intro, and then it leads into the second part. So
could you talk a little bit about the breath of that, the breath control? Because when I think of taiko drumming, of course, I think of the physical stamina that's required for that. And if anybody who hasn't seen a taiko performance, there's often parts of it in which the drummers are interacting with very heavy drums. So there's a lot of muscle tone and control. That's part of it.
Very large sticks as well. So
yeah.
And so it can be up to a pound or half a kilo for each stick. So I mean, basically you have to, there is of course some stamina, but also then using the breath and also the momentum, using the weight of your arm sticks and then sort of directing that towards the drum with rebounds and all that. That helps you to sort of sustain time playing for 2 hours. But of course you don't play taiko for 2 hours straight. There's like quieter moments, and such as flutes and so on. And that's how sort of you can play for that long. But as a training, I mean, I've been doing that since I was 18, so I haven't really stopped at that. That's why during the pandemic, I made a point to play it on the roof, so I would be able to keep on playing the taiko and not sort of for a whole year not have all of those muscles being used. And so I was fortunate enough to be even in New York, living in an apartment that people didn't complain and even sort of thank me for energizing them and hearing. So when I would take walks, people would say, "Are you the one who plays Taiko?" And it really helps me, and I'm really having a hard time. So it's really rewarding to hear that. I mean, everybody's having a hard time, but playing the Taiko sort of energizes myself and sort of gives me energy, and I was glad that it was being passed on to other people.
Does the breathing of the shakuhachi somehow, because you talked about it as a meditative practice as well. Can you say a little bit more about that? And I ask because breathing has been a big part of discussion with this pandemic, and I
So
think we should
yeah,
reflect on that a little bit.
so in Shakuhachi, the idea first, I'm sort of writing a book, so I'm trying to get some of the history, and I'm finding that there were a lot of things that were made up, and then later on through centuries saying, "Oh, it burned down, we rewrote it, but here it is." So that happened in the 16th century, and of course, it's so many years back, but people can still trace down. They don't see papers or books written about it, or there's no information about the facts that they pretend. But basically, it started in China, and some monks were actually playing sort of a bell, and one student wanted actually to study with that master, but he wouldn't let him. So he recreated the sound of the bell with the flute, which already is pretty out there as an explanation. And then that sort of, he created a few songs after having a dream. So we are almost in the religious sort of almost different legends. But so, and then those teachers went to Japan and passed on those songs. That is the story. But technically, basically playing this instrument, you are breathing. Meditation is breathing anyway, you just seated, but you are actually creating a sound. So by blowing through the flute, you sort of use your whole breath and sort of quiet down, of course, the breathing. You don't breathe as fast, and because you try to sustain and create having a longer tone. And also in Buddhism, I mean, in this flute, there are 7 notes. So your breath has to go through the 7 levels. And so it's sort of reaching sort of Buddhahood through your breath and creating a tone. So the best would be to, with just one note, that perfect note, to reach Buddhahood. And that's in Japanese, ichi on jo butsu. One note, ichi on, jo becoming butsu, Buddha. So that was a saying that they used in that sect, in that teaching. So in the Meiji era, the sect was disbanded and forbidden, and as they were sort of abusing power, and as they were the only ones allowed to sort of travel without having passes, because from going to town or province to province, you needed a paper, a pass. And the ones from that sect were allowed by the shogunate to travel and be able to travel without passes. So the shogunate was trying to control the sect, and the sect sort of took advantage of it. And at one point, it just went. They were just too powerful, and they sort of stopped them.
It's thank you for relating all that history, and I didn't know you were writing this book, so you've immersed yourself now into the historian's craft as well.
It's just a book. It's a collection of music, of songs that I wrote, as well as some classical pieces. But I wanted a section with some history of the flute. And there's actually a lot I found out that is written about the shakuhachi, and dating back from the 70s, even in English. And there's a lot of scholars that wrote about it. That was interesting. But then I found out suddenly, all these discrepancies about some of the history that's been meddled with.
Is there, you talked about the logic of the musical structure and Buddhism. What do you know, or is there much of a connection then also to the music of Shakuhachi related to health? I mean, is it something which is also supposed to be part of a kind of normal experience, interaction people have with nature, or the sort of health of their body and their mind?
Okay, it's cutting off a little bit, so I wasn't able to hear everything.
No, I was asking you about the connection between the music of the Shakuhachi and health in general. I mean, as we think of it as something related to Buddhist practice, it must then also have some really strong relevance to sort of a healthy life.
Well, I believe, I mean, for the Buddhist monks, I mean, it was a sort of a more ascetic, sort of a rigorous lifestyle. In Onde Kozai, in the more modern setting where we were playing with the Taiko group, living as a commune, the goal was to grow our own vegetables, which the first group did, but we didn't have the fields to do that, though we tried to sort of eat sort of fairly healthy. And as part of the training, again, we did 30 to 40 miles a day, and then 4 hours of taiko playing. So it was quite, in a way, I mean, healthy, or actually sort of trying to be as, as focused in our practice, and feeding our body with just, mostly vegetables or rice, and trying to be able to sustain, and also to be able to run, and to be later on to have the stamina to do all the performances that later on we did on tour.
So just a quick reminder to folks, you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking to Marco Lienhard today. And he's the founder of Taikoza, and he's a master in taiko drum and shakuhachi, and a composer, and has performed around the world. And I think we have time for another song before your neighbors in the hotel room there tell you it's time to stop. Can we get one more in?
Pretty good, yes. So this song is called Unzen no Mori. And that is, Unzen is where we lived with the group, and it's in Nagasaki, up on top of a volcano. And I'll talk a little bit about it later. So here is Unzen no Mori. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this song, actually, you were talking about disasters. So during the pandemic, obviously, we don't have only pandemics, but we also have different problems. And in Japan, they've had a lot of rain. And where I lived in Unzen, actually, for 7 years, just a house that was right there where we lived, not more than 100 yards away, the whole mountain fell. And I had a friend there, and his whole house was destroyed. And his name is Mori. Mori means also forest, so that's why the forest of Unzen, but it's also in honor of that family. His wife and his daughter and himself perished, and by the just, what do you call it? The ground just fell on them and just engulfed them. So
Thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful, and it's a beautiful tribute to your friend.
it's kind of a yes.
It's a really contemplative piece.
In that, yes, it's kind of more kind of a quiet and just acknowledging, force of nature and just the peaceful, just you come from nature and end in nature. I mean, maybe become literally, in that case, earth.
So, Marco, I wanted to ask you how you think the pandemic has changed you as an artist, if it has.
Well, I'm actually, I'm not so sure, as it's sort of, it felt it was forever, but then at the same time it went pretty fast, and so I try right away to be responsive. Within a week, I was like, there must be ways to help the kids in schools, make some videos. So I was right away trying to make these editing videos and trying to do whatever I present in a way that it would be entertaining, realizing that children having to stare at a screen wouldn't be very interesting after a while. So having little things, panda going through the screens, or when explaining the bamboo, panda bears love to eat bamboo and things like that, just adding little entertainment through the explanation, tried to make it more interesting. So in that way, it helped me develop in a different way film editing, which I never thought I would be doing, or being more technical about zooming. And I was fortunate enough that a college didn't cancel on me, but it was in early April, and they were willing to try the Zoom and to do a live performance. So I had to sort of scramble and find out how to do that. And so in that sense, yes, it helped me develop a lot. And but then also with the help of a lot of people, I was still able to travel and to perform live. And so being able to go to Europe was very helpful to be able to perform. Especially, I didn't have to wait a year or a year and a half. It was only about 6 months, though I was performing on the roof, but to have an audience and really perform on larger drums really full time. And that was very sort of very helpful for myself and for my sanity, probably. And then later on to regularly be able to perform here and there. And then they allowed us to perform in the New York parks. So I got some grants, and I tried to do as many performances as I could in the parks, and tried to integrate some of my students as well, because I knew they were ready not to play on real drums instead of at home on Zoom on drum pads.
Well, my son still, if you're around my apartment Sunday mornings at 9:30 in the morning, you start to hear, yeah, and this is the drum pad, and he's doing it from South Korea, and it's still great. I mean, he's still learning a lot.
He's able to connect with the students here in New York, so it's really great to be able to sort of keep that.
Yeah, but I want him back. I want him back in the room. I want him to be able to make more noise.
Yes.
More
I'm
music.
sure everybody wants to. Yes.
Well, when are you coming to South Korea?
Well, I don't know. There was this thing in Japan. I mean, it was last week actually, but I didn't think Japan was ready to bring to open their door. Though I think they just about did, but it was just too expensive, and it was the 13th anniversary of the death of my teacher. So on year 13, I think there's a big event, and I forgot 17, and so. But I just played at home, and I told them I would be playing in New York, and I put a little incense for my teacher and played a song on. So this flute was made actually by Yokoyama Katsuya, so my teacher, who was also who played with Seiji Ozawa and played at Carnegie Hall with November Steps with Takemitsu Toru, a sort of famous piece in Japanese new music, contemporary music. So he's the one who opened, who opened sort of the doors, to Japanese music, and sort of being very welcoming and of non-Japanese, as well as in the Taiko, Mr. Den was very open to non-Japanese. So that is something that really helped in me being able to keep on performing and encouraging me.
Well, none of us can predict what's coming with the future variants and waves, but as soon as you can get to Japan and we can get to Japan, we will see you in Japan, or we will see you if you get a chance to perform in South Korea. And I'd like to kind of end where I started, just to thank you for your art and for your being a patient teacher, and also for coming on COVID Calls a couple times. It's been really great, and it means a lot to have you as part of this sort of final grouping of episodes. And thanks for doing it, Marco.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Stay healthy, everyone. And we will see you next time on COVID Calls. And there are 3 more episodes remaining. 2 of them are memorial episodes where I'll be reading obituaries. And then please tune in at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on March 18th for the 500th episode, where I'll try to explain what COVID Calls has been all about, or at least what I think it's about. Please join me then. Stay healthy, everyone. We'll see you next time on COVID Calls.
Thank you.